In this video, I'm going to help you to understand how cells divide. Your body's made of cells. How many cells do you think are inside your body? When I just Googled it, Wikipedia said there are about 30 trillion. If you write 30 trillion in numbers, it looks like this. That is a lot of cells. In reality, different people will have different numbers of cells inside them, and Wikipedia predicts that the number of cells inside a human is somewhere between 20 to 40 trillion, depending on certain factors. Can you think of any factors that might affect how many cells are inside your body? Did you think of this one? Sex. So whether you're a male or a female body might influence the number of cells that you have. Another one is the size of your body. So even if you've got two people of the same sex, if one of them is taller, they're going to have more cells in their body because there is more of their body. And did you think of this one, your age? So when you were a baby, you were obviously much smaller and you'd have fewer cells in your body than you do when you reach adulthood. It's important to remember, though, that all of us start as one single cell. So a sperm cell fertilises an egg cell, and that fertilised egg cell then becomes the whole of your body. So you've gone from one cell to trillions of cells. And in this video, we'll look at how this happens. So welcome to BioSmash. I'm Jo, I'm a science teacher, and I'm going to help you to smash your biology revision. In this video, we'll look at why cells need to divide. We'll look at how cells prepare for the process of cell division. And we'll look at what happens when cells actually divide. I'll also include some check-ins so you can test if you've understood the important points. And I'll try and squeeze in some revision tips along the way too. This is actually one of a group of videos looking at cells, so if you haven't watched this one already, I recommend that you look at the link below and watch this one before going any further. So let's get started and look at why cells need to divide. As we mentioned earlier, everyone starts as one single cell. This one cell divides to make two cells, and each of these two cells then divide so that we now have 4 cells. And this process continues until we have trillions of cells. And your body actually needs to make more than 30 trillion cells. One reason why you need to make more cells is because cells get old and die, so you won't have all of your cells for all of your lifetime. A red blood cell, for example, can live for about 70 to 120 days, so your body keeps needing to make new red blood cells. Sperm cells have a much shorter lifespan, and one resource I looked at suggested that they live only about 3 days. But there are some cells in your body that live much longer. For example, some of your nerve cells in your brain might live for your whole lifetime. We also need to make new cells to replace cells that get damaged. So, for example, if you cut your finger, you are damaging cells and you will need to grow some new cells to replace them. So let's have a quick check-in and see how much you've remembered. So imagine you're in the exam and you've got this question: why do cells need to reproduce? The little 2 in brackets tells us it's a 2-mark question, so you need to think of 2 reasons. So can you think of 2 reasons now? You might want to write them down. You might want to pause the video to give yourself time to think. And I'm about to show you the answer, so if you're not ready for it yet and you want a bit more time, just pause the video until you're ready. So here's a possible answer. Each of the words in purple is worth 1 mark. So if you've written, so the living thing can grow bigger, that will get you 1 mark because bigger things need more cells. And if you've written that we need to make more cells to replace dead cells, you get a mark for that. Or to replace damaged cells, you get a mark from that. Obviously, you only need to get 2 marks, and there's 3 possible ones here. In this next part of the video, we'll look at what a cell needs to do to get ready to divide. As this diagram shows, when we're making new cells, what actually happens is one cell has to split into 2 cells. So that one cell will need to get big enough to be able to divide into 2 cells. And there are lots of steps that need to happen. As we've talked about before, all a cell is a bag full of liquid. So the bag that contains the liquid is called the cell membrane, and the liquid inside the bag is called the cytoplasm. So if one cell is going to split into 2 cells, that cell needs to get bigger and make more cytoplasm. Hopefully you know by now that there are lots of cell parts inside the cytoplasm. One of these is called the nucleus. The nucleus is a hollow ball, and if you open it up, inside you will find DNA. And that DNA is actually all of the instructions that the cell needs to follow. So these instructions are called genes. If some of this seems a bit new to you, then go and watch this video, which is all about the nucleus. I'll put the link below. So if our one cell is going to split into 2 cells, the nucleus will need to be copied so that we've got a nucleus to put in each new cell. So one thing that happens before the cell can divide is it needs to copy the nucleus. And to do this, the cell needs to copy each separate piece of DNA that's inside the nucleus, so there's a copy for each of the new cells. So each piece of DNA is called a chromosome, and each of those chromosomes is copied so that there is 2 copies, and 1 copy can go in each of the new cells. So before the cell can divide, the cell has copied its DNA, and you can see here each piece of DNA is there twice, so there's a piece of DNA for each new cell. If you're looking at the cell under the microscope, it will look something like this. The cell will have got bigger and all of the DNA will have been copied. Now, this process is more complicated than I've just described, and I will make a separate video describing the role of mitosis, so we'll come back to that in more detail later. Another part that you find inside the cell cytoplasm are the mitochondria, and mitochondria are there because they take sugar from our food and they release energy so that the cell has energy and our body has energy. And if you feel you need to do a bit more revision on mitochondria and their job, then check out this video, and again the link is below. So in this diagram you can see that before the cell can divide into 2 separate cells, the one cell has got bigger and it's copied all of its mitochondria, so it's made enough mitochondria to go into 2 cells. Another part that you can find inside a cell is a ribosome, and a ribosome looks something like this, and a ribosome can take little building blocks called amino acids and build them into proteins. And yes, you've guessed it, I've made a separate video all about ribosomes, so if you want a bit more revision on that, the link again is below. In this diagram, you can now hopefully see that as well as getting bigger and copying the cytoplasm and the DNA and the mitochondria, the cell has also copied the little brown ribosomes so that there are enough ribosomes to go into each new cell. So well done for reaching this point in the video. You're obviously trying really hard. It's time for us to do another check-in and see how much you've remembered. So this time the exam question says, describe 3 things a cell must do before it can divide. So see how many things you can think of and try and think of at least 3 so you can get 3 marks. It's often worth trying to think of an extra one just in case one of the ones you think about isn't on the mark scheme. And I'm about to show you the answer, so if you're not ready for it yet and you want a bit more time, just pause the video until you're ready. And here someone's written an answer. The cell needs to grow larger, copy its DNA, copy the mitochondria, and copy the ribosomes. So there are 4 marks in this answer. They've got 1 mark for grow, 1 mark for the idea of copying the DNA, 1 mark for copying the mitochondria, and 1 mark for copying the ribosome. So you only need to have 3 of them, so you can give yourself a mark for each of those points that you included. If you didn't get many marks, you might want to go back and watch the earlier part of the video before you carry on to part 3. So if you've made it this far, you are doing really well and are obviously trying very hard with your revision. In this next part, we'll look at what happens once a cell is ready to divide. As we said before, the cell is ready to divide when it's copied all of its DNA, its mitochondria and its ribosomes, and it's growing bigger. Once a cell is ready to divide, the 2 sides of the cell membrane slowly move together. Eventually, the 2 sides of the cell membrane move so close together that they touch, and this separates the cells into 2 separate cells. And because these cells are identical, we call them 2 identical daughter cells. And once these 2 daughter cells have been made, there's 2 different things that can happen to them. So the first thing that might happen is the daughter cell will then get ready to divide again and will then split to make 2 new daughter cells. Alternatively, the new daughter cell might become a specialised cell. So instead of going and making new cells, what it will do is it will change shape and it will become specialised. So for example, it might become a muscle cell, it might become a red blood cell. And as we've talked about before, specialised cells do specific jobs. And if you want to have a little bit more detail about that, then look at the video linked below. So you've now reached a point in the video where you get to test yourself and see how much you've remembered. If you need a bit more help, I've made some resources that you can use to help you to learn the key phrases, and I've put the link to these below in the online shop. So let's get started and look at part A of the exam question. So part A says, explain why a cell needs to divide. And I'm about to show you the answer, so if you're not ready for it yet and you want a bit more time, just pause the video until you're ready. And here's an answer that you could have written. So cells divide so that we can grow bigger and to replace dead and damaged cells. So you get 1 mark for growing bigger, 1 mark for replacing dead cells, and 1 mark for replacing damaged cells. So if you've done well, well done. If you're finding it a little bit hard, then go back and watch the video again until you get all of the key ideas, because we've covered a lot. There is a lot to remember. The second part of the question asks us to describe how a cell divides. So see if you can either Tell yourself the answer out loud or write it down on a piece of paper, but don't go any further until you've got the answer. And I'm about to show you the answer, so if you're not ready for it yet and you want a bit more time, just pause the video until you're ready. And so here's our answer. So the cell grows bigger and it also copies its DNA, its ribosomes and its mitochondria. And the cell membranes then fuse to form two identical daughter cells. So try and give yourself a mark. So you get 1 mark for the idea that the cell needs to grow bigger before it can divide, 1 mark for talking about copying DNA, 1 mark for talking about copying ribosomes, 1 mark for talking about copying mitochondria. Then you get another final mark if you've talked about the fact that by the end, the cell membranes fuse and you end up with two identical daughter cells. So two identical daughter cells is a really important phrase to try and remember. So write it down and try to memorize it. A massive well done to you for reaching the end of the video. You are clearly an intelligent and hardworking person who deserves to do really well in their exams. If you found the video helpful, please do subscribe and give it a thumbs up to help other people to find the videos too. And if you did find it useful, then you may also find it helpful to watch some of the other videos I've linked below or this one here. So good luck with your exams, keep working at it, and together we'll help you smash your biology revision.